Anwar Ibrahim, welcome to Lateline.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What is your legal team telling you are the prospects of success at next week's court appearance?
Purely from the point of law and facts, there is no case. So as far as the legal team is concerned, they are not really worried about the facts and the law. Their concern is to what extent can we ensure the judiciary, the highest court of the land, can remain and can be assured of its independence.
And what's your view on that?
Well, friends overseas have urged me to stay out, knowing the conduct and the past track record of the judiciary. But I, on the other hand, feel that based on the plain facts and the experience that we have gone through, I need to at least give an opportunity for sanity to prevail, for them to respect the rule of law and protect the independence of the judiciary. So I am giving it a chance.
What sort of evidence is the prosecution relying on to argue its case?
Well, they tried, merely political, they used DNAs, but all has been demolished, and there was early enough evidence from the doctors, no clinical evidence of penetration. So I don't know what they want to proceed on by just going on to say that government chemists have said so, and the alleged victim has declared or affirmed his position in the court. So they're just relying purely based on that. Never mind the evidence, never mind the facts adduced.
The Malaysian government has recently been involved in a crackdown based on the Sedition Act. What's been behind that?
There has been some views expressed that the pace of action against political leaders, academicians, student leaders, etc., over 20 now, is just to prepare for this culmination of this federal court, the decision. I'm not too sure of that. But what's clear is that an obsolete draconian act or law introduced by the British colonial masters against militant communists are now used against anyone, any person deemed to be critical of the government. So I think they have actually broadened the scope of what they consider as anti-national or seditious.
The Prime Minister himself has previously said that he would repeal the law. What's holding him back, given he has previously said he agrees with 100 NGOs and the Malaysian Bar Council that the law does need to be scrapped?
Yeah, unfortunately, the Prime Minister has never remained consistent. His earlier pronouncements are, to me, impressive. Well crafted by a well-greased public relations, international public relations company, but then none of these have gone through. For example, the issue of One Malaysia, and now there's a rise of racism and religious bigotry. There is, in fact, the decision to repeal the Internal Security Act. But what happened now is the introduction of similar draconian legislation. And now, worse, an assurance, a categorical, firm assurance by the Prime Minister to repeal the Sedition Act. But now, never before in history, they have used Sedition Act in the manner they are doing so now against virtually all groups and categories.
Have you sought any assistance from the Australian government?
Our MPs were there, speaking to MPs, I met Foreign Minister, and I think this was conveyed. As far as I'm concerned, these issues are quite well known. The Australian High Commission representative has always been present during the trials. In that sense, I'm quite grateful. But generally, leaders and governments are quite muted. I think there are a lot of trade considerations, contracts, lobbies by the big conglomerates and business interests. So I think the issue of freedom and democracy has been somewhat sidelined, except possibly in Afghanistan or Iraq.
What do you mean?
You mean, I mean, when it comes to Afghanistan, they seem to be very, very determined to promote democracy and free elections. When it comes to their neighbors, they seem to have compromised to a large extent. So that to me is quite difficult to fathom, frankly. But in quiet diplomacy and in some of my meetings with earlier foreign ministers, Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd, etc., they have shown a lot of sympathy and concern, and they have always assured me that on private and quiet diplomacy, they have raised these issues with the Malaysian leadership.
Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop, have they given you any indication that they would raise these issues with Prime Minister Rajak?
Foreign Minister Julie Bishop did meet some of our MPs last week, and this was transmitted, and of course she was firm in terms of supporting the principle of independence of the judiciary and not to use the courts to harass opposition leaders. But to what extent will she bring it up is not made known to me.
You've just returned to Kuala Lumpur from the UK. Did David Cameron or any member of his government express their support for you and your party during this challenging time?
I did not, because any meeting. I was there to co-chair a task force on reform of higher education in the Muslim world, dealing with the issue of extremism, fanaticism, and the whole outlook about education, which could lead to some of this perverse view of the religion and Islam. But I was assured by Foreign Minister Baroness Wasi, the past minister in the Prime Minister's office, that this was raised with the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, who did assure that on the quiet this has been raised.
Have you applied for political asylum in any country that has expressed its support for you?
A very strong call, urging by friends abroad, particularly in Turkey, the UK, the United States, for me to remain outside. I mean, I was just back about 3-4 days ago from London, and they have urged me because they don't believe that the judiciary would be independent and that they would act on the instructions of the leadership in Malaysia, political leaders in Malaysia. I've actually given some thought, but then my decision is final, irrevocable. I came back because this is my country. I've struggled for democracy, freedom, and justice all these years. I've suffered immensely in prison, assaulted to near death, but I think it is the correct method to convey a message not only to the elders but also to the young Malaysians that if you want to have freedom and justice, we must be prepared to pay a small price.
In the event that you fail in your appeal and are in fact sent to jail, what reaction do you expect there to be from the public in Malaysia, especially given that you won the popular vote in last year's general election?
Yeah, notwithstanding a fraudulent process in the elections, we did win. And unfortunately, after 1.5 years, there's not one meeting that the Prime Minister had with or called with the leader of the opposition or with the opposition members. And all calls for dialogue or for some form of reconciliation in terms of national consensus on issues of race, religion, constitutional guarantees has been ignored or summarily dismissed. And so I don't believe Malaysians at large would just take it and just concede. But what form of protest or disagreement they would show, I will leave entirely to them, because we don't know. There's still lots of prayers and hope that, as I said, sanity would prevail and that the judiciary would act purely based on law and facts.
I also wanted to talk to you about radicalisation in your country, because it's been revealed that around 150 Malaysian fighters have joined with Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, roughly the same number that have gone to those countries from Australia. What is the Malaysian government doing to tackle extremism in Malaysia?
I think in terms of the efforts to deal with the issue of fanatics and extremism, we support all measures taken by the authorities. Although we don't quite agree, because at the same time, whilst you condemn these fanatics or groups going to Syria or elsewhere, you do condone fanatics and extremist views, religious bigotry, a clear sign of intolerance towards non-Muslims, the absurd allegations, assertion that this country is going to be Christianized. These are not only condoned, but we seem to notice a clear trend supporting groups within the ruling establishment and also groups paid and outsourced by the ruling party. And this, to me, is a major issue that we must address. I alluded to earlier this task force on the reform of higher education. This is precisely a problem. The problem now, of course, is fanaticism, ISIL, and the rest, or Boko Haram. But the seed sown is through education and this perverse understanding of Islam, which shows so much intolerance and hatred for the other believers of other faiths.
It's been reported that back in June, Prime Minister Najib Razak urged his party members to be, quote, brave like ISIS fighters. What did you believe he meant by that?
Well, I think it's just as a very plainly silly comparison to use ISIL discipline or so-called discipline. But I would not exploit on that because I don't believe this was well thought of. Probably he must have read in a draft prepared by some of his staff. Knowing him, I don't quite believe that he would support in any way the work of such fanatics in ISIL. But that was a major blunder committed, and he should have been prepared or to immediately withdraw that silly assertion.
Anwar Ibrahim, we have to leave it there. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to Lateline.
Thank you very much. Thank you.